My big suggestion to students, particularly through high school, is
you can do anything.
Choose it for you, not for it is worth it.
Just focus on the next
Doesn't
step.
matter what you're doing.
Don't be afraid.
As long as you're doing
That
something.
is such good advice.
I don't think I could see myself doing
It's a
anything else.
challenging life.
Student nights, Wednesday to
Oh,
Saturday.
I worked on that house.
I racked up every single dollar of debt that I
I
possibly
think there's
could.
a lot of pressure on high school.
Yeah, I
kids
just
these
love
days, right?
working outside.
And if money is something that you care a lot
In
about,
hindsight, that
I've
was,
also been a very indecisive
But you
person.
keep looking for roads that have been less
It
travelled.
was just that moment that I knew what I wanted to do. So nothing else is going to change that.
Welcome to the guest speaker.
Right, let's do this, eh? I love these intros. Sit back and relax. So here we go. Thanks, Megan, for being here. It'd be fair to say you probably struggled academically. The reading and writing stuff, So should we just skip to the sport? For those that don't know you, I'm about to list this thing. It gets slightly embarrassing, but it does speak to you, and I'm going to speak to a couple of things about you. One is the academic stuff. So the Principals Award for Overall Academic Excellence, you were the top year 11, 12, 13, being the Ducks. I'm not sure anyone in my time in teaching's ever done all three levels. The Flower Trust Award recipient, you were first in English, French, German, Media Studies, and Extension Geography. The Waipa Youth Awards, Excellence to Community Service, Scholarship in German. The Zonta International District 16 Award. You did things like Shave for a Cure, and actually shave for a cure. You didn't just raise money, you shaved all your hair off, your beautiful curly locks. World Challenge to Vietnam and Cambodia. You returned to the Rainbow Orphanage, volunteering after that. And then eventually you embarked off to Victoria, which we'll talk about, started law, changed course, because a lot of your story is changing course. But I just want to really touch a little bit and speak to the person away from that academics. You're one of the few people who make me nervous when I talk to you. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but your depth of thought. For example, you talked after one of your trips about visiting elephants in orphanages. And when you spoke to me at a cafe and we were catching up, and you sort of insightfully put it to me that, if I'm visiting them, they're more inclined to lock the elephant up and get more elephants in. And the same with orphanages, that kids would be brought into orphanage. So you had worked out very quickly the world was a funny place and that you were challenging things. And so there were other things you raised alerts to, and as my time as a teacher as well, where I had to take a step back and go, shit, I just didn't get it. So I give that with the deepest respect, but you are a person who makes me slightly nervous. You seem to fight for minorities. You consider how they feel and think. You have been a guest speaker like Grace and many of the people we've had on over and over again. So you've come back constantly to kids to go, what do you need, from telling your story to going through university to how to structure degrees to academic stuff. You're one of the few people I know who ask, and you did it earlier, how are you? And you wait for the answer. And so I know one other person in my life who does that, but you are a genuinely kind person who wants to know, are you feeling okay? Are you good? This interview, I think, will support students. If I was going to sum it up before I start, and maybe I have a caveat, I can change it at the end. For students, it'll be about how to be honest with themselves and others. It'll be not only accepting who you are, but celebrating it. It'll definitely be looking at the world closely and challenging its inadequacies, I have no doubt. It's not a career talk, I imagine. It's a how to know yourself first, and the other shit will come. So look, that's my intro to you. Incredibly clever, but almost sadly that goes that way when I talk about the person. And I just want people to realize that the person they're listening to is something quite special. So welcome. Thank you for being here. And can we start with school and your reflection of it, and just yeah, where it all began before we get to Tasmania Devils.
Wow. Okay. Well, firstly, thank you for that introduction. Those memories, I mean, it brought back a lot of memories from hearing about all of that stuff. So you put me in a really good place to, I guess, channel that era of my life. Yeah, and of course, thank you both for having me on to chat. I'm excited, and hopefully this can be of some use to some students. So my schooling experience, without stressing the things that you've just covered off, I mean, I still joke with my friends and family that I peaked in high school, and the aforementioned examples contribute to the reasons why. I grew up in a small town called Putaruru, about 3,000 people. Myself and several of my peers from that area would commute to Cambridge High every day. We'd leave the house at 7, we'd get back at 5, sort of thing. And I think just that very notion is sort of a formative thing for me. It created a real sense of gratitude that I had the opportunity to be going to such fantastic school, and I knew every day how lucky I was to be doing it. I also sort of always had a bit of an attitude that, if I have to be here for 5 years, I may as well enjoy it. I've got to be here anyway, right? So I may as well make the most of it. And so that's really just what I tried to do. That said, I mean, I leaned into what I did, I think because I was motivated by relationships. I found such a great community at Cambridge High, and it was a place I genuinely wanted to be every day. I wanted to see those people. I wanted to hear how they're doing. I wanted to, even relationships with my teachers, I wanted to make sure they knew that I appreciated what I was learning from them, and so that really made me engage deeply in what I was being taught. My strengths were very much in the social sciences area, English, media studies, that sort of thing, languages. Really love my languages. Wasn't so strong in the maths and science, but that just went by the wayside. I just tried to lean into things I enjoyed and kind of molded my schedule accordingly. So thankfully, again, I had some teachers, yourself included, Blair, who made sure other teachers kept maths off my schedule so I could do other more important and exciting things like a whole lot of languages and social sciences. So I leaned into what I enjoyed, and I guess really that guided my school experience. I think the interesting parts about high school for me were coming to terms with who I was and also what I was supposed to be, right? So I realized at a pretty young age that I was gay. I realized probably when I was 13. That is not something that featured in my public high school life. I didn't necessarily feel the need. It wasn't a huge, big, pressing thing for several years, right up until the very end, where it kind of did become a big, pressing thing. I did keep that pretty well concealed, though. There were some moments along the way where I had to kind of, I had several, internal crisis moments where I was considering, right, what do I do with this? What do I do with this? It's coming to the surface. What am I supposed to do with it? And it wasn't always the case, but I was getting to the point towards the end of high school, especially when I was in a public-facing role. I was head girl in year 13. I didn't feel that I could share that information. I thought it would compromise my reputation. I thought that it would make people feel as though I had deceived them, and that was the very last thing I ever wanted people to think or feel about me, because I had always been as honest as I possibly could be. So there were some moments where I had to contend with that. And thankfully, whoever happened to be interfacing with me at the time that those things bubbled up treated it with such kindness and compassion. I remember I accidentally came out to one of my teachers when I was about 15 or 16. And I ended up going into their classroom at a lunchtime and saying, please, please, please don't tell anyone I'm not ready. And they said, hey, it's okay. No big deal. Not a big deal to me. No one needs to know. It's your story. It'll happen when it happens. No problem. And I found that so reassuring. So I always felt very well supported. Even though I didn't feel like I could be completely open with everyone. Yeah. So there's
Can I speak to that, Megan?
sure.
Not everyone would have that positive experience. I'm not saying it was a positive experience. It wasn't a bad one. That's not to say, had it been blurted out at year 9, that you may have got what some others receive or experience, which is a little bit of a range of things that can happen. So, I mean, you've raised it. Is there advice to kids who are sitting here listening to this going, well, same, before we get into your career path and the advice you can give there? What do you say? I mean, it wasn't you were keeping it a secret. That's not your advice.
No. Yeah. I mean, we can never be sure how others are going to respond. I think my advice would be you can have both. In my mind, I really truly believed that I couldn't be, I hate using the word successful, but that's what I thought at the time. I thought I couldn't be successful and who I was. I thought I had to pick. And that's just not true. I think high school as well is a really, it can be a real pressure cooker environment, and everything seems like it's such high stakes.
Yeah.
That's not the case. You'd be alarmed to realize, and I say this with the utmost compassion, how much nobody really cares. I think as well that being comfortable with yourself, that exerts confidence, and confidence is very attractive. People want to be around confident people, and it makes other people feel confident in themselves as well. So I guess my advice would be do what you need to do in your own time. There is no rush. Life is a very long time. But if you feel the need to put that information out there now, you want to cut to the chase, hats off to you. I admire that. I respect it. And everyone else will too. So just be yourself and, trust your instincts.
But brilliant.
Yeah.
Anything else on at school before we move out of school that might have modified what happens later? Is there?
Yeah. So, wow. I mean, as I said, I grew up in a very small town. I grew up rurally. My time at high school was, I guess, yes, outwardly facing a great time. And that doesn't mean it was disingenuous. I really enjoyed high school. I had a great time, and a lot of that experience is really positive. But things at home were not great for me. I was, but basically all the way throughout high school, at home, things were sort of falling apart, being glued back together again, falling apart, being glued back together again. And I was right in the middle of that, So a lot of my mental load at the time was around keeping my mental health afloat, and also keeping my parents' mental health afloat was a big responsibility. And I think that it sort of helped me keep things in perspective. I did, in a sense, use school as a little bit of a release. When I was at school, things were good. I had people to chat to. The energy was high. I didn't have to think about those responsibilities. So it really was an escape for me. I also, used school as a way to, basically attract role models. That is not to say my parents weren't role models, because they were. But I really do believe it takes a village. And, when you're in high school, you're very impressionable. You're wondering what the heck you're supposed to do with yourself. I found it really useful to collect those role models and get as many different perspectives as I possibly could. So, yeah, when I was at home, I guess I didn't realize for several years later that actually what I had grown up in was a household which did involve forms of abuse. And that is something, I think, which, looking back, I think at the time, maybe it contributed to my, my drive towards social connections. And I think since then, it's certainly helped me keep things into perspective. I feel like my whole life story has been a story of moderating this idea of success, again, to use the dirty word, and doing the right thing. And I think having that dual experience at high school, having all of these awards and accolades and blah, blah, blah at high school in parallel with these experiences of trying to figure out who I was and also trying to hold my family together. I think it helped me keep things into perspective and those two things, both have their place, but I think having them together really helped me out in a long way.
Can I ask, and you don't have to answer because I don't know how this will go, but
Sure.
from my memory, cutting relations with Dad was something you needed to do for you, I think, ultimately. Has that been something you've had to maintain for you and Mum, I think, actually, more than just you?
Yeah.
Has that
Mhm.
continued? Yeah?
Yeah. So, I did make the decision, I think about 8 years ago now, to call off that relationship for the time being. You're right. It was definitely something I had to do just to basically get my head above water, deal with everything else going on. It's been a fantastic tool, honestly. It has allowed me to grow so much. I mean, 8 years is a long time. I have gone to a point now where I've reestablished that relationship quite recently, and it's been really positive. Gentle, slowly. But again, when you grow up in a household where there is abuse, nothing is very straightforward. There is no easy right or wrong. There is no failure or success. It's all grey area. And I did what I had to do for me, and I'm glad I did. I think it's been good for us both, actually, me and my dad. And we'll see how it goes. But long story short, I'm now in a much better position to be able to be making calls about the relationships that I maintain. Every relationship comes with vulnerability. You have to accept that. But I feel much more established now and much more able to deal with all sorts of colourful characters, which I've encountered throughout my life. So I'm feeling much better equipped, and it's had a positive outcome so far. Obviously, I wouldn't say it's had a positive ending. Nothing ever really ends. That's the beauty of family, isn't it? But it's been a very worthwhile journey. Yeah.
And going back to what Ludlam said in the beginning about when you really ask how people are, and it was fascinating even hearing, I knew your subject choices, but the gravitation away from a science or a math, like I'm like that because that's such a black and white answer. Like this is the result, this is that. Whereas your social sciences, your languages, language is understanding that there's this one, I'm holding a cup, but depending on where you come from, you call this a copia or a this or a this. And so all this stuff and this duality you're experiencing in high school, as someone, a friend who's like around you, I think that hearing this explains or helps contribute to why you might see someone on the surface, but you really say, oh, well, how are you? And you give them that opportunity to go, oh, actually, like Megan, this and this. So I just wanted to acknowledge that and say thank you, because as a recipient of that throughout the years, and even when we started this, it makes a lot of sense where you go, I had this success and outwardly most definitely dominating the awards stages and all this, but to go like there was stuff going on behind the scenes that people didn't know. Now I'm having the strings come together, and I think it's pretty cool how you had that experience and you just went positive, because you could have easily gotten a little bit sour, but you didn't. Instead, you, like you said, you craved that social connection. And I'm sure, which we'll get to, helps you make those next steps beyond high school too.
Yeah, thanks for that. I guess what I'd say is, there may be, well, statistically speaking, there are probably hundreds, thousands of people experiencing the same thing. I think what I'd say is, what I kept in my mind is succeed despite. It might not be because of, but succeed despite. And again, I hate using that word success, but this is what I was telling myself when I was 15, 16, 17.
Yeah.
My circumstances do not define my future. I think change is the only thing that is guaranteed. So that's essentially how I did that. It was a conscious choice.
Yeah.
I know that a lot of people don't have the same support networks, and that's why I'm so grateful for that Cambridge High community, because it wasn't just something that I miraculously pulled through with on my own. It was something that was built on every day with every conversation I had with a teacher or a friend or it really does take a village. But thank you. I appreciate that.
So if we wrap all of that up, Megan, that whole experience, the academics, the accolades, the stress at home, the sexuality, how did you transfer? What were your thinking around where do I go next? And how did that work for you moving on?
Yeah. So coming out of high school, honestly, for me, the thinking at the time was very straightforward. I wanted to end up in Wellington. My sister lived there. I'd visited a few times. I thought it was the coolest place ever. At high school, I hadn't really traveled much in New Zealand at all. So when I saw Wellington, I just thought it was the Ritz. And I knew I wanted to end up there, so it was the only uni I applied to. I sort of being in that rung of successful people, at age 17, 18, as successful as you can be at that age. I too was caught into you must do law or doctoring or something like that.
Right.
And obviously, yeah, right. It's so classic. So I picked law and a BA in a bunch of social sciences.
Yeah.
And as you mentioned before, I didn't end up sticking in law. I'm glad I didn't, but maybe we'll get to that shortly. But basically, when I was coming out of high school, the path for me was straightforward. Looking back, I didn't know a lot of what I didn't know, but I don't think in that instance it really disadvantaged me. I just did what I'd always done, which was just keep on doing what I liked. I knew where I wanted to go, and I knew that I wanted to study social sciences, and I was like, oh, I guess I have to put something important in there too, so I guess I'll do law. That's how I got to Wellington, and I stayed there for 9 years, and I absolutely loved it.
Did you go into the halls, Megan? Where'd you stay first year?
I did.
We haven't had many Vic kids, so I'm just interested.
Yeah.
Yeah, great. Well, so I went to Victoria University of Wellington. I ended up in a hall called Stafford House, and it was a bit of unusual choice. A lot of ex-head students ended up in one of two of the Vic halls. One was warehouse. Mostly that's where the law students would congregate. So I think 80% of their intake or something like that at the time was law students. And the other one was Te Puni, which was a huge brand new hall, a mega hall. I think it had 350 people in it or something like that. And pretty much everyone there was a head student or a former student exec member with a huge scholarship. So I went down for an open day. I had a look around and I was like, I'm really not vibing with this. It's too... All you really had to yourself was a room, and everything else was shared space. I grew up reasonably independently. Mum and I sort of used our house as a landing pad. We were both sort of off doing our own thing. So I'd sort of just been kicking along, more or less functioning independently for quite some time by that point, and I didn't want to be being told when dinner was ready, So I picked a self-catered hall. That's why I ended up in Stafford House. And it was much more, I guess it was the perfect step for me. It was a 3-bedroom, kitchen, bathroom, little apartment. I say little, that's not an understatement. We barely had room for a couch. It was more like a kind of office furniture, kind of settee sort of thing. But it was perfect. It was everything we needed. It was also the hall which was furthest away from uni, which meant I got a good sweat on walking up the hill to uni every day. Lots of fresh air, and I was way too cheap to take the bus, so that wasn't an option. I went to Stafford House. It worked out great for me because it was just like apartment living. Everyone there is a student, so there is still that student support. And there are, RAs and, what do they call them? The people who, the real adults who live in the hall and make sure all the students are doing the right thing. Like if you get up to mischief, someone will come tell you off. So there is still that element of, it being a student facility, but you get much more independence. And that suited me down to the ground. So I'm really glad I made that choice.
So I know eventually law gets hoofed out. What do you, you might want to touch on that, but where did your degree go in terms
so that was a twisty turny journey as well. So I started off with law and a Bachelor of Arts and a handful of social sciences. I ended up, after just over a semester, deciding that law was not for me. I really wanted it to be. It was interesting, but I didn't love it. And I was looking around the lecture hall of, 300 students who were, trying so hard to capture every word the lecturer was saying. And I got the gist. Like, I sort of understood the appeal, but I didn't feel it myself. I think as well, law had a lot of, law comes with a whole cultural package. It's not just what you're studying. Maybe if it had just been what I was studying, I actually might have enjoyed it more. It was the culture primarily that actually put me off. It was a bunch of tosses. I couldn't stand to be amongst this room of, the self-importance that comes with law starts early. As soon as I started semester 2, I was just like, oh, yuck. Like, lining up outside of a lecture hall and hearing what these guys are talking about, it just wasn't me. I didn't want to know, I think from first year, well, probably had a little taster of it in law in first year, then took a break, then came back to it. A lot of those journeys about sort of been observing the annals of power, and you can see why law appeals to people who are keen on exploring those annals of power. So it wasn't for me. I decided no. It was a huge decision at the time. I realized at that point I'd never actually quit anything, and that was a huge barrier for me to overcome. I thought that quitting was failing. I didn't really know how. Luckily, at that point, I had made a really good friend in my apartment at Halls, and she said to me something that really resonated. She said, Megan, if your relationship with law was a relationship with a person, it would be abusive. And that just stopped me in my tracks, and I was like, you're so right. Like, I think I need to be there. I feel like I should be there. I should want to be, but it just keeps dealing me blow after blow. And every time I'm around it, it just makes me feel yucky, and it just really resonated. And that's when I made the decision. And I just thought, no, this isn't for me. If down the line it turns out it is, sure, but not right now. So I actually changed my degree pretty early on. I switched out of law into a triple major BA. I think before I was just doing double major. And then a couple of years later, as I was sort of coming to the end of my degree, I went to go ask about changing some courses. I had really been enjoying my sort of Māori tikanga courses, and I wanted to see if I could fit more of that in. And my course advisor said, well, actually, did you know you could finish 6 months earlier if you turned your Bachelor of Arts into a Bachelor of Science? And that was baffling to me. I was like, I'm the least science-oriented person I've ever met. But I guess by that point, when you do social sciences, when you do geography, you do have to do some base level, statistics papers and physical geography papers. So by that point, I guess I had covered off quite a bit of actual science.
Yeah.
So that's what I decided to do. And I got to do all my extra papers, and I got to finish earlier and save some money on courses. So yeah, that worked out really well for me. By the time I had finished my degree, though, I'd actually already started in my job. I got a sort of a little bit of a side gig while I was studying at uni, working as a researcher for a lecturer who I formed a really great connection with. And he knew someone who needed an assistant policy analyst. I didn't know what that was, why I should want to be one, but I trusted his opinion, and he thought I'd be great for it. So he recommended me. I went for an interview, and I got myself a job in government before about 6 to 12 months before I finished my degree. And honestly, at that point, my interest in uni sort of plummeted pretty quickly. I was all absorbed by this new job, and also, if I'm honest again, I guess what actually kept me going with my uni courses was that I had met my now wife trying to finish off some physical geography papers. Now, she's a geologist, so she's a real scientist, and she was really helpful. So helpful that I married her, so there you go.
The thing too with the uni drop off with the interest, it's this idea of you go to uni. Why are you going to uni? Is it to get this paper, or is it to set you up for whatever you're going to do next? And so it makes sense. We've had a couple people who they get this other job and then they're like, oh, kind of want to wrap the uni up because, you know, you want to put a bow on it and get the paper, but it served that purpose. And so once you had the job, it makes sense that the interest went away.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I realized as well the contrast when I started working, when I would have to, you know, catch the bus up to uni to go to my classes in the middle of the day or go to my tutorials. The pace was very different. You know, work was like boom, boom, boom. And you get to tutorials and it's like, it's like hitting the brakes. It was kind of nice for a lunch break, but I was like, this is not a good use of my time, you know? It's just funny how, I guess, context is everything. Whatever you're looking for at the time kind of dominates, I guess, what you've been into. And I mean, we're all human, aren't we? We just chase the next best thing, and that's what I was doing at the time. I'm glad I did finish off my degree. Obviously, I had to. You know, I wasn't being employed by the government without a degree. I was being employed by the government on the basis that I would get a degree. So I had to finish that one off.
When you had, so now you've got the job, you're in Liv, was Wellington always the place? Or did those are two pretty big things in life, keeping you there. Was it an active decision or just kind of fell in of like, yeah, Wellington's where I'm going to stay?
Yeah, Wellington's the place. I love Wellington. Wellington is the home I choose. I think, yeah, Wellington is a place that I'll return to. Now obviously I've got 8 or 9 years of amazing memories of Wellington, which really help consolidate, you know, that sense of home. But I mean, for so many other more practical reasons as well, you know, I'm a public servant. It's where government lives in New Zealand. Obviously there are opportunities in other cities. But, you know, if you really want to get amongst it, Wellington is where you want to be. It's got a whole buzz about it. The public service culture is very real. It is not all consuming, but you learn a lot from the connections that you make being around the people, you know, in the industry you're working in, I suppose. And also, I guess, just lifestyle.
Can you talk job? Like, what are you?
Yeah.
Because you did a number of things, didn't you? Employment wise, can you?
Yeah.
What
Well,
are
I
you
say,
doing?
yeah, yes and no. So, I mean, job wise, basically what happened was my first job, certainly one I fell into. As I say, I knew someone who knew someone, didn't know what the job was. And I guess that goes to show you really don't know what you don't know. So I guess one of my key messages for students listening would be ask questions, stay curious, because, yeah, you just don't know. Even leaving university, I didn't know how to get into government. I didn't know that government was something that would actually be well suited to the types of interests I had. I didn't know what a policy analyst was. I didn't know what policy was. And yet, when I entered the government, so my first 6 years actually was in the Ministry of Education Infrastructure Division. When I entered that environment, I realized people's parents had been bureaucrats or government servants or so-and-so's, you know, it's almost like a family thing that runs in their family. There was multi-generational government employees there, as well as a good mix of fresh new faces from all over the country, huge range of diverse perspectives in the but, you know, I just didn't realize that this was this whole sector that I knew nothing about. It's actually pretty much perfect for me. It was pretty bizarre. So anyway, yeah, it's good to ask questions. Yeah, basically I ended up in the Ministry of Education Infrastructure Division. I started off as an assistant policy analyst, and I basically just worked my way up. I started off in the policy division. I then, in that area, moved up to being a policy analyst, which is one step above assistant. Then I made a pretty big change. Well, sort of big, still in the same department, but I moved into investment, and that's where basically my career took an absolute spike. I jumped on an escalator that catapulted me into space, honestly. It was a pretty wild ride. So basically I joined that team after a year and a half in policy. I had realized that I needed a little bit more pace. Policy is a great place to learn discipline. So it was a great place for me to start because I learnt core foundational skills for being a public servant that are sort of overlooked in other areas. So I learned how to write for government. I learned how to write for ministers, learned how to write for decision makers, chief executives or secretaries. I learned how to package arguments to appeal to the right people. I learned how to get people on board with certain ideas because even if your advice is perfect, it doesn't mean anything if it doesn't have anybody's support. I would write drafts and shamelessly make 22, 25 iterations of the same document. I'd write, and rewrite until it was perfect. So it really taught me fantastic skills. But I was ready for something with a bit more pace. And so that's why I moved into investment. And that was insane. So basically what investment is, let's take a couple steps back. Working for government, what does that actually mean? I'll put myself in the shoes of 21-year-old Megan who didn't even know what government really was. So everybody pays taxes, right? You pay taxes when you earn an income. You pay taxes when you buy things. Everybody pays taxes. The government collects up taxes, your money, and when people elect in a government, that elected government gets to decide where your taxes go. And they get to decide how much of your money gets spent on different things that society uses. Obviously, belonging to a society is an interesting construct that you can pull apart and dissect, and I did that for 3 years of my degree, and I had a great time doing it. But basically, in a nutshell, what it means is, in life, there are some things that you have to share because it doesn't make sense for any one person to own. And those are the things, typically, that government will spend your taxpayers' dollars on. How those dollars are spent can have a huge, substantial impact on your quality of life. I mean, if you can imagine trying to go about your day without being able to use the road, without knowing that if you rode your bicycle into town and you got hit by a bus, that you couldn't go to hospital. If you couldn't have gone to school unless your parents were very, very well off. If you try and think about your day and subtract everything that the government pays for, you'd have a hard time getting by, let's put it that way. So basically, government is the main way that social investment happens. And it's the main way that well-being happens, in my opinion. So I love being a part of government, and basically coming out of university and getting into government, for me, was an interesting ride because I didn't really know what I was in for. When I entered the investment team, I got to be face-to-face with what that distribution of taxpayers' dollars looked like into social investment. Now, I was working in school buildings, so school property. So the Ministry of Education at the time had the country's second biggest property portfolio. Now, again, if you take a step back and you think about what property is the most valuable thing, one of the most valuable resources because we need it for everything we do. We need it to live on, we need it to work on, we need it to provide our resources so that we can eat and drink and all of those good things we like to do, recreate, for example. So it's a huge portfolio. Basically what my job was to do in that investment space was create a structure of people, of decision makers, who got to decide where the money went. Now, when I arrived, there were some structures in place for this, obviously. Wouldn't work without them. But basically my job was to improve that system so that it worked better. And I did that for 3 years. I got incredible autonomy in that role. I was basically let loose. It was very sink or swim. They said, here's a problem, go fix it. And that's what I spent that 3 years doing. It was a thrill. I absolutely loved it. I got to learn a lot really quickly. Of course, I used that sort of relationship driver to try and absorb as much information as I possibly could. I had so much to learn. It was steep learning curve. And I made so many mistakes. I failed so many times. I felt, honestly, there was a period where I thought every single day, I'm screwing this up, I'm screwing this up, I'm screwing this up. But you just show up again the next day and you try again. You show up again the next day. It was an incredible experience in learning what it feels like to try something and fail on your own dime in a way, you know. Obviously, I had the trust of my team, which was immense and which was incredibly encouraging. But having the freedom to fail and then figure out how to fix that time and time again built my confidence very quickly. Yeah, it was a real roller coaster. The highs were very high and the lows were very low. And of course, this kind of pace of life did have its downsides. I was essentially a 23-year-old young queer woman, trying to tell a board of 50-plus-year-old men how to spend $1 to $2 billion a year. Now that dynamic alone, it feels like a salmon swimming upstream, right?
And some of the people listening, we're talking, you know, you're sitting in a community moaning about whether we're recladding all our buildings, or we've got moisture damage, or I need my school's growing, so I want to build a block. You were, and that wasn't just in one town, you're talking nationally.
That's
every school with every demand, whether it be sewage, buildings, roofing, an admin block, a gymnasium. You knew about it. If I rang you and I did, hey, I've got this thing at Cambridge High, and you'd go, yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Yeah, is that? Yeah.
Yep, that's right. That's right. And, you know, there are so many levels to the type of problem solving, you know, that had to be applied to that kind of thing. Obviously, I was not alone. I don't want to give the impression that I did this all on my own. I did not. But, you know, there were already so many great things going on. There's already so many people working on really innovative and useful solutions to managing this problem, which was ultimately a scale problem, right? A multiples problem. It's easy to manage one school. You get a groundskeeper in there, yeah. He sorts out everything. You know, I remember Neil riding around on his quad. He knew everything about every nook and cranny in that building, or buildings in that school.
Yeah.
And he flawlessly dealt with that. But then you scale it up to over 2,000 schools. Over 2,000 schools, countless buildings. And those schools all being built at different times. Most of New Zealand schools were built over 50 years ago. So there are some obviously legacy issues when you think about the era or the building standards at the time that those schools were built. Most of the time, schools don't have a great record of history about their buildings or infrastructure. They might know the rough year something was built, so if the government didn't record it, they didn't know. We sort of have to guess what the problems might be. You know, and basically that multiples problem in the investment space, it was about allocating money not just to fix those schools and increase their condition or remediate them, make sure they're fit for purpose and healthy, warm, dry spaces for kids to learn in, but also building new classrooms as well. We have a growing population in New Zealand. We always need more classrooms, and it will be that way for some time. Building new is an incredibly expensive thing to do in New Zealand. I think I read a report recently that said New Zealand has one of the highest rates of investment in infrastructure, but one of the lowest rates of return, meaning we get the least out of the dollars we spend on infrastructure. Now that's a whole nother question in and of itself. It doesn't mean we need it any less, but it means our barrier to accessing it is much higher. So how do you deal with that? That's the kind of question that, you know, we would get to, well, I would get to chew on and try and make some recommendations about. Now, eventually I got to a point where I realized that, you know, investment, distributing funding, obviously to do that, you need to prioritize your need. Some schools were in much greater need than other schools. But every school thinks that they have the greatest need. So that's another problem to face and to communicate as well with the public. I moved out of the investment space eventually into strategic asset management because that was sort of a way where I could, get out of that hectic pace of life that I had adopted, being in that space and setting up that governance structure, or trying to anyway, and a way that I could step back a little bit and think about the long term. So not just the short term, which wheel is squeaking the loudest, if you will, Or how do we, sort of play whack-a-mole, like which is the most pressing issue? Whack, 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 how do we get through this stack of problems? But instead step back and think, okay, we're going to have these problems in perpetuity.
Yeah.
If we defer doing things that need to be done now because we can't afford them, or because we haven't prioritized them correctly, or because we don't have the right information to even be able to try and make a decision, what impact is that going to have on not just school A down the road, but also our entire education infrastructure system? So how do we prepare for the future of the provision of education in New Zealand, knowing that we're going to have these challenges pretty much forever? We're going to have a difficult investment environment. We're going to have schools that get older and older. We're going to have probably less ability to have people in schools to take care of them, to stop those buildings falling apart. So how do we deal with those challenges? And so towards the end of my time at the Ministry of Education, I moved into strategic asset management, which was a really great shift, I think, because it kind of it was a great way to scratch that itch I had about these bigger, longer term problems. Sort of be able to chew the fat, but also, I got to shift from a short term way of thinking to a long term way of thinking. And that was another great experience in and of itself.
Cool. And it's funny because you sort of said you peaked early, but I'm not sure you did, because your age and, like you said, that's pretty high stakes. It is interesting too. You can't sit at school, like you've clearly noted, and go, I'm going to be that thing, because you wouldn't even know that thing. And so part of it, and that's what, something Grace and I are trying to battle with, is by saying to the 12, 13, 14, 15-year-old, what's your job going to be? It's dangerous. Because it came up. But the reality was that was a lot of kids feel that pressure. Like a young boy might go, not being sexist, I'm going to be a builder then, or a arborist. But we waste talent. So
it's a moot question. In fact, I would recommend not asking it at all. No. Instead, ask, what do you enjoy doing? Yeah. What are your skills?
Yeah, and watch some of these things and just explore.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and I think there's something to be said, right? When I was at school, I did what I enjoyed and I was good at it because I enjoyed it. Those couldn't be separated, and that has remained true. I think when, throughout my career so far, I have leaned towards the things that I have enjoyed. Obviously, you have to do some stuff you don't want to do from time to time. You get the bad with the good, but all in all, if you enjoy it, you're gonna thrive.
Yes.
So, Megan, now, because I know that we're finished at the Ministry of Education, but you're in TAS right now. What can you fill that gap? That's a lot. I feel like that's just the thing.
What are you doing, Megan?
Yeah.
Where are you? What are you doing?
Yeah.
Well, good question. Yeah. So I decided to call time on Wellington and New Zealand, I guess, for a little while. My wife Becca and I, we decided, we'd missed out on our OE, if you will. Well, my wife's Scottish, so I guess she was on OE when I met her, actually. But I missed out, so I took her overseas and we went traveling. I was like, I need to stretch my legs. I need a change of scene. I realized as well, so I guess a perk of working in the public service, and I say perk somewhat sarcastically, is that the government changes every few years. And when the government changes, decisions change. Now, that's just part of the job. Government changes, the public service remains forever. But the public service does have to work for the government. Now, I just want to explain what that means a little bit. It's a bit of a tangent, but I think it's worthwhile explaining. When you work for the public service and government, you don't have to agree with everything the government thinks or everything the government tells you to do, but you do have to do it. That's called impartiality. And
sounds like being a teacher, Megan.
Well, you're a public servant too, right? We're all just here trying to keep the gears of society turning. The difference is
I do what I liked.
That's right. Yeah, the difference is most people love teachers, and most people have huge misconceptions, again, in my opinion, about what bureaucrat-side government public servants do. And unfortunately, those misconceptions tend to filter up to our fantastic elected governments, and that can mean that they sometimes cut your workforce really substantially in a really short period of time. So I did not lose my job, actually, when the last government turned over, but a lot of my colleagues did, and my workplace emptied out pretty quickly, either by losing their actual jobs, i.e. their jobs became non-existent, so they had to find something else to do, or because the sort of why I left, actually, is because the environment had soured quite significantly in our industry. So when those people disappeared, morale went downhill, really. It was really sad. It's really unfortunate, but that happens. It swings and roundabouts. It happens in every industry and sector. It's not unique to government. It's just that on government you can put a bit more of a clock on it, if you will. There's election season. Things get crazy around election season. There's the first 100 days season, which is the government's first 100 days, where they make a lot of promises and they have to try and keep them all, and the poor public services scrambling trying to keep up with those promises, because of course it's not the politicians doing those things, it's us, it's the public service, which again is something I think a lot of the public don't really understand. And then there's the piece in between. And those are basically the 3 phases of the public service cycle every 3 years. So yeah, morale had gone downhill a bit. My wife and I thought it would be a nice time to go travelling. We'll give it a little break. Also, by that point, I had realised, as much as I loved infrastructure, I had done 3 different sort of things at that point. I'd done policy, investment, governance, and strategic asset management. That's a pretty good round for a bureaucrat and something as specific as education infrastructure. I gained a lot of really transferable skills. I think that's the fantastic thing about public service, is it's not as though if you start in one place you have to be there forever, because your skills are applicable to so many different topics and so many different problems. So you can just keep going and going forever, really. You can never really get around everywhere. So there's a lot of variation and possibility out there. But yeah, I realised, I'd done a good dash in infrastructure. I had my time. There are a sort of fixed and predictable number of problems in any sector, and once you've learnt them all, and that curiosity and intrigue is pretty well exhausted, you thought, yeah, look, I've given it a good crack, I figured it was a pretty good time to move on. Obviously I hadn't solved those problems, but I literally knew people who'd been there for 40 plus years trying to solve those problems, and I thought, good on them, if that's what floats their boat, power to them, but I wanted a little bit of variation. So we decided to call it there. We went travelling for 6 months. That was a bit of a weird time, eh? We thought it was going to be like all roses and roller coasters, but it wasn't that great. It was good. It was fun. We made a lot of great connections. We did a lot of visiting family around the world. We went to Canada and the States and the UK. Formed good, strong, lasting relationships, which I think is really important. I think maybe that's something people don't talk about enough, actually, is investing in those relationships that keep you afloat. So I'm really grateful that we spent time with those family and friends and consolidated those relationships. Obviously, as I said, my wife is Scottish, so I kind of gained another 50% of family and friends, which, I really wanted to get to know better. So it was fantastic to be able to go and meet, her side of the family and friends. Portion, we'd met them for a couple of days at our wedding, and I said, good to meet you. I guess I'll see you at some point. That's the beauty of being an international couple. But yeah, so that was awesome. But in terms of the adventure we were looking for, or the freedom, or the I don't even know, what do people look for when they go traveling? We found some of it, but not as much as we thought. We thought that we'd really enjoy being disconnected or unattached or uncommitted to things. We actually realised after about 3 months, we felt a little bit powerless. We tried to run away from our problems. They didn't go away. They just kept following us. We ended up, in a couple of hurricanes. We were in New Orleans. We were around for Hurricane Helene, and then we went to go help clean up afterwards. And we just thought, it would be really nice to be able to contribute to society, because things are not going, and I mean this in the most, again, endearing, positive possible way, things are not going to get better they're going to keep getting worse. And what I love about being in the public service is you can consistently feel like part of the solution.
Yeah.
So yeah, we learned a lot from our time off of work. I think for me it was a great refresh. I got to recharge my batteries a bit. I did need it. It started in high school that I worked too hard. I pulled several overnighters. I pour way too much energy into things, and I had done that throughout that time at work as well. I described before there are some downsides to having a life as fast paced as I described, and those costs are very serious. I think and I guess this comes back to what I mentioned before about that dilemma between doing the right thing and success. Being in the public service sort of gives you a tiny bit of a free pass on the doing the right thing, to a point. You can kind of justify whatever it is you're doing and say, well, at least I'm doing something good. It's not always true. It's important to keep checking yourself. But I had also been on a supercharged track to success, quote unquote. And that had been actually really damaging in some ways. I did have a pretty substantial burnout in 2022. It was incredible. It was like I really came to understand what people meant when they said, having poor mental health is like breaking a leg, because I felt like I had broken my brain. Right. And I lay on the couch for 2 weeks and I didn't feel like myself at all. I felt like I had a limb that I just couldn't use. And so it was a really interesting experience. Again, all valuable learnings, incredibly formative. I think you can only go through these things to really understand the point of, trying, failing, trying again, trying something different, changing your mind, remaking your mind. But yeah, it was a really interesting time. So I needed a little bit of time to recharge my batteries, and traveling did that. It was awesome. Built some good connections. Then decided, hey, we better look for some jobs. To get back to your question about Tasmania, we'd come for a short break here. Again, Becca had met some people. She's a scientist, so she met some other scientists on a trip to the subantarctic islands, and we'd come to visit them. They happened to be from Tasmania. We absolutely loved our little trip here that we took, so we sort of put that in the back pocket and said, well, if ever we want to leave Wellington, Tasmania might be a nice place to come. That time came much sooner than we expected, and so we decided we'll throw our CVs out in Tasmania, in the rest of Australia and New Zealand, maybe some of the UK, and just see what sticks. And if one of us gets a job, we'll move there. So I got a job here, so we moved here. And six weeks later, Becca got a job, so it was worked out really well for the both of us. So now I'm in Tasmania. I am working for the Department of Premier and Cabinet. Again, it's a public service organisation. It's an interesting one because it kind of connects everything. Education is quite specific. The Department of Premier and Cabinet has a lot of different portfolios within it. So it stretches from everything from community engagement all the way to, the things that I work in, which include security. So I work in things to do with national and protective security. It's much more of a policy role. So again, a nice slow-paced role. And yeah, the team's fantastic. The work is incredibly interesting. And I'm enjoying it. I'm on a 1-year contract. Australians like fixed-term contracts. That's how they do it over here. If it carries on, it carries on. If it doesn't, it doesn't. And that's okay. Another reason we came to Tasmania is we wanted to feel like we had moved somewhere where we still sort of felt like we were on holiday. And Tasmania offers that through and through. We look at our window to a huge mountain, 1,400 meters. We feel like we're in the bush, cockatoos fly over screeching every morning. We do feel like we're on holiday. So sort of taking it easy at the moment, kicking back a bit, enjoying the change of subject matter, enjoying the change of lifestyle. Yeah, that's where I'm at right now.
Awesome.
Amazing. I thought you were on holiday.
What kind of am?
Janine said, what's Megan doing? She's just kicking around in Tasmania. I don't know.
What kind of am? Yeah. You're not wrong.
Working. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey,
I'm with
look,
you.
yeah, man, what do you say? Yeah, remembering you at school and not and I get. I think the one thing you said that was interesting was that
The one
I
thing.
can't remember how you worded it, that you didn't want to feel like you deceive people.
Yeah.
Because I must admit, as one of those people, when I found out about some of the things, it was a little bit like, what? You never told me. You never. So I do get that notion of, yeah, but everyone's pace and information and like I say, having had the blessing of having you in my life and someone who can ask me how I am and what do you need is real special, and being able to keep updated on what you're doing is amazing. So thank you for, like I say, not for this time. Thank you for this time, but every other time you've stepped up to support kids. I know you're someone I can pick up the phone and say, look, got a problem, got a kid who needs or whatever. So, and I'm just glad you're doing you. Yeah, it's really cool. And congratulations on
Appreciate
everything you've done, because your CV must be ridiculous too. I know you don't give us stuff, but if we were being that capitalist promotey sort of person, I'm thinking you're an incredibly qualified, well sought after person. So
I'm doing my best. That is, I won't lie, nobody's saint. It is something you contend with. Trying to find ways to make yourself appealing in the future, even though you're just kind of enjoying what you're doing now. It's a constant tension. But yeah, I guess I'll just stick with what I know, which is just do what I enjoy and see what happens. I think as well, though, I will say, like, something that has kind of come about and repeated time and time again ever since high school is I just want to be useful, and I need to feel useful. And again, there's pros and cons to that. It means that you chase weird and wonderful paths that you didn't know existed because you felt useful, and so you gave it a go. And then the more useful you are, the more opportunities you get. People love fixers, but it also comes with that downside of how useful can I afford to be. Context is everything. At the end of the day, I'm just one person. And you've got to choose. Yeah, you've got to choose where you put your effort sometimes, and it can be hard. Because you want to feel useful, you want to be doing everything you can. But you've got to keep afloat. All of those things are important. Context is everything. Balance is everything. There is no wrong decision. I sometimes feel a little bit guilty at the moment that I've kept it down a gear. I'm chilling out a bit. But this is important too. I'm investing in things like, I've just started trail running. I joined a cycle group. I'm Beck has found this amazing job, and maybe it's her time to shine. And I can just sit back for a bit, and it doesn't have to be full noise all the time. Something I've learned is that life is a marathon, but I'm a sprinter, and you can't run a marathon at a sprinter pace. It doesn't work. So at the moment, I'm kicking back. I'll sprint again later.
yeah.
Megan, the last question, and I feel like we've asked it, but I want to make sure, is I always ask final is if you could go back and give yourself advice, and I feel like you've given quite a bit in this reflective mindset, but Megan to Megan back in year 12 or 13, what advice would you give you?
I'd probably say failure is inevitable, so just get into it. Fail again, fail 3 times, fail 6 times. Failure doesn't really mean anything. It just means opportunities to grow. If you can, fail as fast as you can, because the sooner you learn that something's not for you, the sooner you can move on to something that is. Saying yes sometimes means saying no. And yeah, just life is just one big failure, so you may as well have fun, eh?
Thank you.
That's probably what I'd say.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, look, thanks, Megan. Really appreciate it, and lovely to see you. Lovely to hear your voice and your happiness, and your future looks great. Whatever the hell it is, and I can't wait to sort of see you in person whenever that is. But take care of yourself, and
No, likewise. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for this opportunity. It's always good to, think about things in retrospect. Yeah, and hopefully it can be useful. Yeah. Thank you.
It's a pleasure.